Well, this is Steve Ridgel, and I wanted to talk a little bit over the next couple of videos about how you do what's right, how you know what's the right thing to do. I think most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to do what's true, want to believe what's true. The trouble is, how do you know what's true and how do you know what's right? And it seems to me there are four ways you can decide what's right. One is you can decide that what you believe is going to be right and true. In other words, you will decide what your truth is. Of course, the second way is to let culture define what's right and what's truth. What do the people around you, the people in your country, the people in your town, the people in your world, what do they say is right or true? And that will be your truth that you will live to. Of course, if you're a religious person, you might say, well, the church determines for me what's right and what's true. Either the church laws, the church rules, what the preacher says, and that will be the truth I live to. That'll be how I know what's right. And of course, the fourth way is to say, well, I'll take the Bible, and the Bible will be what I believe to be true and right. Now, I'll tell you toward the end of this what I believe, and most of you will know that if you know me, but I want to talk a little bit about deciding that I will be the one to determine what's right and what's true. You may have heard the story. I've heard it many times, and everybody swears it was their mom and grandmother, but the story goes the lady took out to cook a roast, and every time she got ready to cook a roast, she cut off either end, a couple of inches off each end, put it in the pan, put it in the oven. One day her husband says to her, "Why do you always cut the ends off the roast?" And she said, well, I learned that's the right way to cook from my mother because she always cut the ends off. And one day he couldn't stand it and he called his mother-in-law and said, "Is it true you always cut the ends off the roast when my wife was growing up?" And she laughed, said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Why? Is that the right way to cook it?" And she said, "No, it's the only way the roast would fit in the pan I had." Sometimes what we think's right is not. And of course, the problem with me deciding right is my experiences may be pretty limited. And of course, the other problem is, what if I decide what's right and my next door neighbor has another version of what is true or right? We've got to live together, so how do you know whose version is right and whose version is true? I mean, after all, I'm the smartest person around, and I'm certainly the best person around, and so what? Now, that doesn't really work. It's hard to live in a culture if everybody does what they want. It's even pretty hard to live in a church when everybody does what they want. And the Bible even says there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is death. I'm not sure I'm really equipped to always know what's right, because maybe you don't do this, but if I'm not careful, I can have a tendency to justify whatever I want to do as being right or true. It's the right thing to do because, and I can convince myself that everything I want to do happens to be true and right. And generally, I'm going to tell you, if everything you want to do is right, you are the most amazing person I've ever known. And I just don't think I've ever known anybody who absolutely everything they ever wanted to do was right and true. So I'm not sure any of us individually ought to be the ones to decide what is right. And if you want to be a Christian, well, certainly you can't be, because then you're saying, "God, I know what is right and true." And I don't think any of us want to put ourselves in that position. So I'm not sure that any of us as individuals ought to determine what is right or wrong. Next time, we'll talk a little bit about culture being the defining truth for what's right. So until then, this is Steve Ridgel, realizing that I'm not the best one to know what is right and even what is always true. Maybe you don't either.